Shoot, shovel, and shut up. That's the message that a lot of Canadians seem to be getting from our government these days. My name is Tim Moen. I'm the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Today I want to talk to you about a serious issue that faces all Canadians. And rural residents are at the forefront of this issue because of the somewhat unique situation they live in. They are isolated, they are alone, they are vulnerable. And so the issue of self-defense affects them more so quite often than city dwellers. And, you know, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, an hour away from the nearest police detachment, miles away from the nearest neighbor. When you choose to live in the country, you are agreeing to take on a certain amount of responsibility yourself. And that's why you actually want to live in the rural areas, is because of the responsibility, the extra responsibility on your shoulders. It's character building. It creates a certain lifestyle and livelihood that you can be proud of. And you know, you don't have the luxury of having your garbage taken away every week by a garbage truck. You don't have pipes that bring you clean water. And certainly things like, you know, medical emergencies and fires and security threats that might pop up. Again, you're on your own for these things. You have to solve the problem yourself. You know, you can't just call a complaint line and say, hey, I've got garbage stacking up here. Want to do something about it? Or what's this brown stuff coming out of my tap? If you live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, you have to deal with those issues yourself. You can't complain about them. You can't expect someone else to take responsibility for these issues. You take them on yourself. And we gladly take on those responsibilities. That's why we live in a rural area. But more and more, our ability to take on these responsibilities to sustain ourselves is under threat by our own government. You know, our right to self-defense is an ancient right. It's instantiated in common law, in the Magna Carta, in the very principles that built our great nation and Western civilization, that allowed our nation to be the wealthiest and freest in one of the wealthiest and freest in the history of mankind. And these principles are under attack. These laws are being broken by our government, who is continually infringing on our right to self-defense. And recent cases have created a lot of controversy, have starkly divided the nation. And it usually falls down along lines between people who understand what it's like to be confronted by predatory violence, a lot of rural folk, and some people in the city too, and then people who live in safe, suburban, progressive neighborhoods where they have their progressive dinner parties and they watch their Trevor Noah and their Bill Maher, and they get the narrative that these ignorant people who live out in the country are just bumpkins who are itching for a fight and who can't be trusted at all. And so part of me understands where this divide comes from. To me, it's simply a lack of empathy for people that face predatory violence as a present reality. And so I want you to, for a second with me, just imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a rural dweller. Imagine that you live on a farm, that it's the middle of the night and you and your family are sleeping. You know that the nearest police officer is over an hour away. You know that your nearest neighbor is miles away. So you're on your own and you hear some noises out in the yard, and you wake up and you realize there's trespassers, and you know that there have been a rash of property thefts in recent months, with hundreds of thousands of dollars going missing from your neighbor's property. And your heart starts to thud and your knees start to get shaky and you start to panic, because what do you do in this situation? It's a nightmare scenario. You know, is your family threatened? That's number one. Are you and your family threatened? That's on the forefront of your mind. And then the other thing is, what about your property? You're barely scratching out a profit, you know, working dawn till dusk and past that on the farm. And all the equipment in your yard is equipment that is vital for you putting food on the table. You can't afford to lose this equipment. It's not easily replaceable. And you need it not 5 months from now when insurance claims are settled, if they're insured. You need it tomorrow when you need to go out or plow the field or harvest your crops or do whatever you need to do to scratch out the living you are taking on by living in a rural area. And so what do you do in this situation? There's no good answers, right? I mean, you can do what the police are telling everyone to do, what the government is telling everyone what to do, what progressive suburbanites are telling everyone to do, which is hide, retreat, do whatever you can to avoid a confrontation, to basically expose your jugular and let these guys take your stuff, take your livelihood, take food off your family's table. Well, that's one option, but that is not risk-free. That inhibits your ability to, in the present, to put food on your family's table. It doesn't solve the threat that's in your yard that might come into your house, that might result in a violent situation. It doesn't resolve the fact that you are now sending a signal that you are weak, vulnerable prey, which is what all predators in nature like, right? They pick the weakest and the most vulnerable to harvest. And so you send that signal, and so you might be putting your family at future risk. You might invite more predators to come fleece you and your family and engage in violent situations. But then there's risks involved with confronting the situation. If you confront the situation, things could escalate into violence. And someone who is brazen enough to come onto your yard and start up your ATV and rummage through your stuff and be willing to take you and deprive your family of the property that you work so hard for, that is necessary for your survival and your flourishing, that they would just come and take that without a second thought to feed their addiction or to frankly, to survive. Well, these people are definitely capable of violence. And it's not the type of violence that you might encounter in a bar, right? Where it's all about social dominance, where, there's that ritual puffing out of the chest and some aggressive noises being made. And you can see this situation escalating and it ends with an overhand right being thrown and the fight going to the ground, and the loser ending up with a bruised ego and the winner ending up with a boost of testosterone. It's easy to see how conflating that type of violence with the type of predatory violence might confuse some people who only ever see this kind of social domination game, the type of game where two bighorn sheep clash heads or two stags lock antlers. Rarely is there ever any serious injuries from those types of confrontations. So when you're confronted with a predator in your yard, this isn't someone who is wanting to lock horns with you. This isn't an escalating situation where you can slowly escalate things and you can puff out your chest, you can try to scare them away, and you can do this dance of domination. This is a predator you face. This is a tiger in the grass, and you are the prey. And they don't care about a fair fight. If they're good predators, you'll never see them coming. They don't care about the social sanctions that progressives poo-poo them about. And they pick the weakest and most vulnerable prey they can. And so these are dangerous situations. And so you better, if you're going out there to confront this situation, you better have a firearm, or you put yourself and your family at risk. But now that you have a firearm and you fire off a warning shot, you put your family at further risk, right? Because now you are committing them to a lengthy legal battle, it seems, and ruining your family's life. And we're seeing this more and more. There is a case in Ontario of Ian Thompson, who was faced with 4 masked vigilantes wielding Molotov cocktails, expressing an intent to burn his house down. He went and got his gun, fired off warning shots, and then faced a lengthy legal battle, 2.5 years and thousands of dollars to get his name acquitted. So his life was essentially in shambles, and he might never recover from this battle, even though he was acquitted. So getting an acquittal doesn't mean that you've won. It just means that you're not going to have to do jail time or something like that. Or there's the case of Frank Meseros, 65-year-old grandfather. The only thing on his record was a speeding ticket in 1976. This is the most peaceful, law-abiding, gentle grandfather. And he fired off a shot over the head of two thieves in his yard. And after 5.5 years and $100,000 trying to defend himself, he was sentenced to a year in jail. A year in jail, this grandfather is doing. How is society served by that? What message are we supposed to take from these cases where people's freedom, their livelihood is being jeopardized by the fact that they're supposed to let predators prey on them? And that's what they're being told at these town halls. The police, I'm hearing over and over again, are telling farmers and rural folk who are worried about the crime and the threat that they face, they're being told to hide, to retreat, to do whatever you can to avoid confronting this. Just wait for police, rely on them, depend on us. Well, that doesn't help you when you're in this situation. You know, what might be more helpful is to teach people what to do in this situation. I mean, farmers are not trained at using force defensively. They're not trained to keep a level head and take up a defensive position and confront these situations in the safest way possible. They are panicked people who are worried about their very survival, and they're liable to do things that a trained person might not do. And so maybe help them out, give them some training, or at the very least teach them how to prevent these crimes, maybe to set up security deterrents that would tell a thief, don't bother with this property or something like that. But instead they're being told, just be willing prey. And this is why farmers are coming away from these meetings angry as all hell and saying things like, well, I guess the message here is shoot, shovel, and shut up. This is a dangerous situation. You know, we can't have a legal system like this where people's ability to defend themselves puts them at further risk. That is undermining the authority of the police even. You know, we should be able to report these things to the police and not worry about our own safety in the future with regards to the threat we face from the legal system. You know, my dad, a number of times growing up on the farm, we would face strangers with clearly nefarious intent coming onto our property. And sometimes, you know, I remember a couple times where a vehicle would be coming down our driveway after dark with their headlights turned off. You know, my dad would jump into high gear. He would grab his firearm, and you could see the stress levels skyrocket here, right? And he would go out, he'd stand on the porch with his gun so that he was visible to these guys, sending a clear message that we're not going to be easy prey. That was effective. These people backed immediately out of the driveway and were gone. But I shudder to think what would happen to him in today's environment. You know, first of all, in those days, you didn't have to have your firearm locked in a safe. You know, he had it on a gun rack in his bedroom where it was easy for him to access. And, you know, I can just imagine if the thieves had that extra time to actually make it on our yard, where he's fumbling with shaky, panicked hands, trying to open up a safe, trying to load that bolt-action hunting rifle, one bullet at a time, with shaky, nervous, panicked hands, right? And what if he had to go out there and confront these people? Well, I can't guarantee what would have happened to them. I don't know that he would have used force in the most judicious, escalating way that progressives and lawyers and police seem to think that these farmers should. You know, in common law, there used to be a maxim that said something like, in the heat of the moment, you cannot weigh to a nicety, a man cannot weigh to a nicety the exact measure of necessary defensive action. In other words, you don't have the luxury of sussing out exactly how much force is going to be necessary to repel this attack in the heat of the moment. This is an unexpected situation. You didn't expect it. It wasn't invited. You hoped to hell something like this wouldn't happen, and you're suddenly confronted with it, and you're not that well trained. And common law recognized the right still to defend yourself and recognize that, listen, we err on the side of the person defending themselves, because you know what? Being a criminal shouldn't be a safe endeavor, but being a law-abiding property owner should be a safe endeavor. And so the common law favored defending yourself. In fact, in some jurisdictions, it was seen as a duty to defend yourself. You would be, the magistrate might throw out your case if you continually came to the judge and said, hey, so-and-so stole from me and I want restitution. Well, if you have a history of not defending yourself from that theft, quite often the magistrate would say something like, you have a responsibility to defend yourself, and if you can't take on that responsibility, then why should the government take on that responsibility for you? Be gone from me. And we've come a long ways from that now, where it's no longer not a duty, it's not a right, it's an offense to defend yourself. It's a sad state of affairs. And what my dad didn't need, what our family didn't need in those situations when we were confronted with a predator looking to milk us. He didn't need a progressive armchair quarterback. He didn't need police giving him platitudes about hide yourself and your family and retreat and don't. What we needed was a man with a gun getting in between his family and some predators. That's exactly what my dad did, and I'm glad he did that. And I'm glad he didn't face the legal system that we face now, which would have, first of all, prevented him from being able to even do the thing where he stood on the porch with the gun. It would have been too late. They would have been on the yard, and things would have escalated further from there. But had he, God forbid, fired a shot, he would have ruined our family. He would have ruined his life. And that is something that I cannot stand for. If you feel the same way as I do, if you see this as a serious problem that we face in Canada, I want you to join me. I'm going to be speaking at some events across Alberta over the next few weeks. I'm going to be in Edmonton on March 8th, Calgary March 29th, Grand Prairie on April 5th. I'm going to be speaking in St. Catharines, Ontario on April 14th at the Canadian Sports Shooters Association, their general meeting. And I'm hoping to get to Lethbridge at the end of April as well. And I'll put the details down below, but I hope you can join me if you are concerned like this, because there's a reason why these rights, these common law rights and the principles of our Western civilization are being undermined. And there's a clear progression happening. And I want to talk to you about why that's happening, and how that's happening, and what we can do about it. And I hope you'll join me at these meetings. Thank you very much.